The car smelled like stale coffee, sun-baked vinyl, and the faint, lingering scent of Tommy's cologne on wood and something clean, like fresh laundry. It was the smell of my entire senior year, condensed into the cramped space of his beat-up 2008 Honda Civic. The passenger seat had a permanent dip in it, molded perfectly to the shape of my body after hundreds of drives to school, to the movies, to nowhere in particular. But this drive felt different. Final dot outside. The late May scenery of our suburban town blurred into a familiar smear of green and gray. I watched the houses we used to trick-or-treat at, the park where Tommy broke his arm falling off the monkey bars, the corner store where we'd pool our change for each landmark was a ghost, a testament to a life that was, in a matter of hours, about to become a past tense. Tommy, oblivious to my internal funeral procession, was drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, a nervous electric energy radiating. From him, he had the radio on low, some indie band he'd recently discovered, but he wasn't listening. His focus was entirely on the road ahead, a metaphor so heavy-handed it made my chest ache. "You good, man?" he asked, glancing over at me. His eyes, the color of a faded summer sky, were bright with anticipation. A stray piece of his sandy blonde hair had escaped the gel he'd used, falling across his forehead in a way that I had to physically restrain myself from reaching out and fixing. "Yeah, of course," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just it's weird, you know, seeing you in all this." I gestured to the back seat, where his graduation gown lay draped in a plastic sheath, a slash of deep cerulean blue against the faded gray fabric of the car. His cap sat on top of it, the gold tassel already affixed, looking absurdly formal and out of place. "Tell me about it." He laughed, a sound that always managed to settle somewhere deep in my gut. "Feels like I'm wearing a costume for a play I haven't rehearsed." He shook his head, a genuine smile finally breaking through his nerves. "Can you believe it, Alex, we're actually done." He always said we. Even though I'd graduated high school last year, taking a gap year to work and save money while he finished his senior year, he always included me. It had always been us, Tommy and Alex. It was a brand, a constant, the one equation in my life that had always balanced. But today, the math felt off. He was graduating. In the fall, he was heading to a university 3 states away. I was staying here, working at the same bookstore, living in the same room. "I can believe you're done," I corrected gently. "You're the one who survived Mr. Henderson's calculus class. I just provided the emergency pizza and moral support. That was the most important part," he insisted, his gaze back on the road. "Couldn't have done it without you." The sincerity in his voice was a sharp, painful thing. He meant it. In his world, our friendship was a perfect, crystalline thing, a pillar of support. And it was. But for me, it was also a house of mirrors, reflecting 1,000 things I could never say aloud. It was the way my heart stuttered when his arm brushed mine as we reached for the same popcorn bowl. It was the catalog of his expressions I kept in my head, from his concentrated frown when he was studying to the open-mouthed awe he had when watching a thunderstorm. It was the knowledge that my love for him was a language I was fluent in, but one he'd never learned to speak. We pulled into the sprawling university parking lot, a vast sea of asphalt already shimmering with heat. The air was thick with the sounds of car doors slamming, excited shouts, and the distant, tinny fanfare of a brass band warming up. It was a world of celebration, but all I felt was a creeping sense of dread. Tommy killed the engine. And for a moment, we just sat in the sudden silence, the bubble of our shared history enclosed within the metal and glass of his car. Well, he breathed out a puff of air. "This is it." He turned to me, and the look on his face was one I'd never quite seen before. It was a cocktail of pride, terror, and a kind of wild, untethered hope. He was on the precipice of his entire life, and I was just the guy who'd driven him to the cliff's edge. "Hey," he said, his voice softer now. He reached over and squeezed my shoulder. His hand was warm and solid, and the familiar contact sent a jolt right through my t-shirt. "Thanks for being here, Alex. Really, I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said all day. I would walk through fire to see him happy, even if that happiness was the very thing that was about to take him away from me. He held my gaze for a second too long. A flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Was it just the weight of the day, or did he feel it too? This sense of an ending. But then he smiled, the moment passed, and he was all business again. "All right, let's do this. I've got to go find my spot in the lineup." Section B, by the big oak tree. He got out of the car, and I watched as he shrugged on the blue gown over his crisp white shirt and dark trousers. The cheap polyester fabric transformed him instantly. He was no longer just Tommy, my Tommy, the boy who'd built a shoddy treehouse with me in the woods behind my house. He was Thomas Peterson, graduate, a young man with a future stretching out before him like an open highway. He adjusted the cap on his head, fumbling with the tassel. I got out and walked around the car to help him. My fingers brushed his as I straightened the golden threads, and the static electricity that jumped between us felt like a tiny, secret confession. "There," I said, my voice huskier than I intended. Perfect. He looked at me, his smile a little wobbly at the edges. See you on the other side, man. He clapped me on the back, a hearty brotherly gesture that felt both comforting and dismissive. And then he turned and jogged toward the growing crowd of blue-robed figures. I stood there, alone by his car, and watched him merge into a sea of people who looked just like him. He was one of them now, and for the first time, watching him walk away, I felt the terrifying gut-wrenching distance of the future he was striding into, a future I wasn't sure I had a place in at all. Finding a seat in the metal bleachers was a mission in itself. I was a solitary figure navigating a maze of ecstatic families. Mothers clutched bouquets of flowers and tissues. Fathers fiddled with video cameras, and younger siblings whined about. The heat, I felt like a spy, an ethnography studying a foreign tribe whose rituals of pure, uncomplicated joy were a language I couldn't comprehend. I finally found a single open spot, high up, offering a panoramic, if slightly detached, view of the field. Down below, the graduates were a solid block of cerulean blue, a rippling tide of caps and gowns. I scanned the rows, my eyes tracing the back of 100 sandy blonde heads before I found him. He was seated near the end of an aisle, his posture straight, his head turning this way and that, trying to take it all in. Even from this distance, I could feel the thrum of his excitement. He looked like he belonged there. I, on the other hand, felt like I was floating, untethered above the whole affair. The ceremony began with the requisite pomp and circumstance. A dean with a booming voice welcomed everyone, followed by a student speaker, whose speech was a well-meaning but generic tapestry of clichés about open doors and limitless horizons. I clapped when I was supposed to, my applause swallowed by the thousands of others. My mind drifted. The speaker's words about the future became a dull drone, a background noise to the reel of memories playing in my head. Last summer, the air was thick and humid, smelling of cut grass and chlorine from Tommy's pool. We were lying on our backs on his trampoline, the springs groaning with our synchronized breathing as we stared up at the star-dusted sky. We were 16 and 17, on the cusp of everything, and the night felt infinite. "Are you scared?" Tommy had asked, his voice quiet in the darkness, stripped of its usual bravado. "Of what?" "Spiders," the dark-eyed joked, trying to keep it light. He was silent for a moment. "No, of." After, of all this being over, my heart had done a slow, painful flip in my chest. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I have this whole plan, you know," he continued, his hands laced behind his head. "Go to college, get a degree in business like my dad wants, get a good job, but what if I get there and I hate it? What if I'm not smart enough? What if I fail?" His vulnerability was a rare gift, one he only ever seemed to share with me in the quiet moments when the rest of the world was asleep. It was in these moments that the line between friendship and the deep, the aching thing I felt for him blurred into non-existence. I turned my head to look at him. The faint moonlight silvered the sharp line of his jaw and the curve of his nose. He was still looking at the sky, but his brow was furrowed with worry. "You're not going to fail, Tommy," I said, the certainty in my voice surprising even myself. "You're the most determined person I know, and you're way smarter than you give yourself credit for. You're going to do amazing things." He finally turned to look at me, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. "Only if you're there to keep me from screwing it all up." He'd said it casually, a throwaway line, but it had landed in me like an anchor. In that moment, lying side by side in the warm dark, his future felt inextricably linked to mine. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, "I will always be there. I'll follow you anywhere. I love you." But the words were too big, too dangerous. They would have shattered the fragile perfection of the night. So instead, I just bumped his shoulder with mine. "Deal," I'd said. And he had smiled, a real smile this time, and turned back to the stars. A sudden surge in applause jolted me back to the present. The dean was back at the podium, announcing that it was time to award the diplomas. My stomach clenched. This was it, the main event. The official severing. They started reading the names, a rhythmic, monotonous list. Each name was met with a pocket of whoops and cheers from a specific section of the bleachers. My eyes were locked on Tommy. He was running a hand over his jaw, a nervous habit I knew so well. He bounced his knee, he adjusted his cap. I watched his every move, as the names crept closer and closer to P. My own breathing grew shallow, my hands clammy. I felt a ridiculous, possessive pride swelling in my chest, so fierce it was almost painful. That was my best friend down there. Thomas Michael Peterson. The world went into slow motion. My breath caught in my throat. I saw him stand, a wide, brilliant grin spreading across his face as his friends patted his back. He walked toward the stage with that easy, athletic stride of his, a walk I could pick out of any crowd on earth. He looked so confident, so ready. He shook hands with the dean, accepted the rolled-up diploma, the scroll that was his ticket out, and turned to face the crowd. Holding it up for a moment, his eyes scanned the bleachers. For a split second, I was convinced he was looking for me, and my heart hammered against my ribs with a desperate hope. But his gaze was sweeping, general. aimed at the section where his parents were sitting. I saw them, his mom, on her feet, waving frantically, his dad recording with a proud, steady hand. And in that moment, as Tommy stood on that stage, bathed in the afternoon sun and the adoration of his family, the space between us felt more than just physical. It was a chasm. He was in the spotlight, celebrated and triumphant, moving forward. I was a secret, a ghost in the stands, anchored to a past he was so beautifully, necessarily, leaving behind. The ceremony ended in a flurry of motion. Caps flew into the air, like a flock of dark, square birds. The sea of blue broke apart, graduates flooding the field to find their families. The noise was overwhelming, a cacophony of joy. I remained in my seat for a few minutes, letting the initial wave of chaos pass, feeling hollowed out. Eventually, I made my way down the steep metal steps, my legs feeling unsteady. I pushed through the throng on the field, a sea of hugs and tears and laughter. It was a beautiful scene, but I felt utterly alien to it. I was searching for one face in the crowd, one smile that mattered. Then, I saw him. He was surrounded by his family, his parents, his beaming grandparents, his older sister who had driven in from the city. His mom was fixing his tassel, his dad was clapping him on the back, and he was laughing, his face flushed with happiness. He looked incandescent. I hovered at the edge of their family circle, unsure of my place, not wanting to intrude. But then, as if sensing my presence, Tommy looked up. His eyes scanned past his grandmother and locked with mine. His smile, already so wide, somehow grew even bigger. It was a smile just for me. He excused himself from his family, his hand still on his dad's shoulder, and took a step in my direction, beckoning me closer with a tilt of his head. "Alex," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "Get over here." Being beckoned into the Peterson family circle was like stepping from black and white into jarring technicolor. The world, which had felt muted and distant from my perch on the bleachers, was suddenly loud, close, and intensely personal. "Alex, honey, there you are." Tommy's mom, Karen, enveloped me in a hug that smelled of hairspray and relief. She was a warmer, softer version of Tommy, with the same sky-blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "We were looking for you. Did you see him? Wasn't he wonderful?" "He was amazing." "Mrs. P," I said, my voice thick. "Really? We're so proud." His dad, David, added, extending a hand. His handshake was firm, his expression stoic but radiating a quiet, profound pride. He looked at me, then at his son, and a small smile played on his lips. This one kept us on our toes, but he did it. "Thanks for keeping him in line this year, Alex." "I think we kept each other in line," I managed, a weak smile on my face. The praise felt like a series of tiny, sharp pinpricks. They saw me as Tommy's rock, his co-pilot, his other half, and but they saw the platonic blueprint, not the messy, complicated architecture of my feelings beneath it. To them, I was family, a safe, honorary son. The thought was both a comfort and a curse. Tommy slung an arm around my shoulders, pulling me into the fold. He was radiating heat and a kind of jittery, triumphant energy. "See, I told you they'd be looking for you. Mom was probably more worried about you getting a good seat than she was about me tripping on stage." "Oh hush," Karen said, swatting his arm playfully, though her eyes on me were genuinely fond. The next hour was a blur of congratulations and introductions. I smiled and nodded, a polite satellite orbiting planet Tommy. The plan, it turned out, was a celebratory dinner at Moretti's, the fancy Italian place reserved for birthdays and anniversaries. As we all started to migrate toward the parking lot, Tommy fell into step beside me, his blue gown slung over his arm. "You holding up okay?" he asked, his voice lower now, meant just for me. "It's a lot, I know. My grandma's going to ask you at least 5 times if you have a girlfriend yet." I snorted, a genuine laugh this time. "It's a small price to pay. I'm good, man, seriously. I'm so incredibly proud of you." He looked at me, and for a second, the loud celebratory mask slipped. I saw a flicker of the boy on the trampoline, the one who worried about the future. "Thanks, Alex," he said quietly, "means a lot, more than you know." The restaurant was loud and celebratory, the air thick with the smell of garlic bread and Chianti. We were crammed into a large, circular booth, and I found myself seated between Tommy and his older sister, who immediately started showing me pictures of her new puppy. The conversation flowed around me, a torrent of future talk. What dorm would Tommy be in? Had he picked all his classes? Did he remember to pack extra-long twin sheets? Each question was a stone skipping across the surface of a future I couldn't see myself in. I picked at my lasagna, offering polite, monosyllabic answers when spoken to. My own life, the quiet shifts at the bookstore, the evenings spent reading. In my room, the gap year that felt less like a bridge and more like a dead end seemed impossibly small and gray in comparison to the vibrant, sun-drenched landscape of Tommy's new life. I must have looked as lost as I felt, because midway through the main course, I felt a gentle nudge against my leg under the table. I looked up and met Tommy's eyes. He gave me a tiny, conspiratorial look, a subtle roll of his eyes that said, "Can you believe this?" It was a private joke in a public space, a secret handshake. In that fleeting moment, the chasm between us closed. He was still my Tommy. He was still here, with me. I felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost made me dizzy. When the tiramisu was cleared and the coffee cups were empty, a pleasant exhaustion settled over the family. His grandparents were yawning, and his parents looked ready to collapse. "Well, son," David said, clapping Tommy on the shoulder. "It's been a day. We're going to get your grandparents home. We'll see you back at the house," Karen added, giving him another fierce hug. As the family started to file out, leaving a wake of goodbyes and drive-safes, Tommy turned to me. The restaurant noise seemed to fade into the background. "Hey," he said, "you don't have to go home yet, do you?" "No," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "No plans." "Good." He grabbed his car keys from the bowl on the table. "Let's get out of here. I need to breathe air that doesn't smell like my dad's cologne." The night air was cool and clean after the stuffy restaurant. We walked to his car in a comfortable silence, the kind we had perfected over a decade of friendship. But once inside the familiar coffee-scented confines of the Honda, the silence felt different. He didn't turn on the radio this time. He just started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, driving not in the direction of his house or mine, but up, toward the hills that overlooked our town. I watched his profile, illuminated by the intermittent glow of passing streetlights. He was gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, his jaw set. The manic energy of the day had finally dissipated, leaving something quieter and more contemplative in its place. The weight of the day, of the diploma sitting on his back seat, of the 3-state distance that loomed in August finally seemed to be settling on him, too. He drove us to Miller's Point, the local lover's lane we'd always joked about but had only ever come to Fort the View. He pulled the car into a gravel spot at the edge of the overlook and killed the engine. Below us, the lights of our town were scattered like fallen constellations. It was a map of our entire lives, spread out in a glittering tapestry. We sat there, side by side, watching the tiny headlights of cars moving along roads we knew by heart. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, the only sound in a silence that felt heavier and more significant than any words we could have spoken. It was the silence of an ending, and I was terrified of what might begin when it was finally broken. The silence in the car wasn't empty. It was filled with the unspoken thing, the massive, invisible presence that had lived between us for years. It was in the space between our shoulders, in the shared air we breathed. Tonight, after the pomp, and the parties and the promises of the future, it felt heavier than ever. Demanding to be acknowledged, I stared out at the sprawling grid of lights below, trying to steady my breathing. Each pinpoint of light was a home, a life, a story. Our story was down there, woven into those streets. But up here, in the dark intimacy of his car, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. "You know," Tommy said, his voice quiet, almost rough. He didn't look at me, his gaze fixed on the view. "All day, I've been smiling, shaking hands, telling everyone how excited I am." He paused, and I waited, knowing this was the prelude to one of our late-night confessions. "And I am," he continued, turning his head slightly to look at me, his eyes catching the distant city glow. "I'm excited, I'm terrified, but mostly, I just feel sad." The admission hit me with the force of a physical blow. Sad, he was feeling it too. The ache I'd been carrying all day, thinking it was mine alone, was a shared burden. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though I already knew the answer. I just needed to hear him say it. He let out a long, slow breath, fogging the corner of the windshield. "Because all of this," he gestured vaguely toward the town below. "It's over. High school, being a kid, all of it, and heading off to a new state where I don't know a single person. It's a lot." He finally turned to fully face me, his body angled in his seat, the dim light carved shadows on his face, making him look older, more serious. "And because I'm leaving you." There it was. The truth, laid bare between us. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, but it cracked open the world. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, trying for a reassuring tone that came out shaky and thin. "We'll call, we'll text. You'll be back for Thanksgiving before you know it." I was reciting the lines we were supposed to say, the comforting lies friends tell each other when faced with an unavoidable separation. He shook his head, a small, sad smile on his lips. "It's not going to be the same, Alex, and you know it." His eyes held mine, and in their depths, I saw a reflection of my own fear, my own grief. Who am I going to call when I bomb my first midterm? Or when I need to figure out how to do my laundry without turning everything pink? Who's going to drive around with me at midnight just because we can't sleep? Each question was a stab to my heart. He was listing the mundane, everyday moments of our friendship, the tiny bricks that had built the unshakable foundation of our lives. A life that was about to be fractured. "You'll find new people," I said, and the words tasted like ash. In my mouth, "You'll make new friends." "They won't be you," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The intensity in his gaze was overwhelming. This wasn't just about friendship anymore. The unspoken thing was stirring, stretching, finally making its presence known. The air grew thick, charged with years of suppressed emotion. My carefully constructed walls, the ones I'd been building for years to protect myself, began to crumble. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sit here and pretend that my heart wasn't breaking. "Tommy," I started, my voice cracking on his name. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I had to say something. The silence had become unbearable, but he cut me off. He leaned forward, closing the small gap between us. His hand came up, not to my shoulder in a brotherly clap, but to my face. His thumb brushed gently against my cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a wildfire through my entire body. My breath hitched, the world narrowed to the space of his car, to the look in his eyes, a look of raw, unguarded vulnerability that I had never seen before. "All day," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "While everyone was congratulating me, all I could think about was you, sitting up there in the stands, alone, and how this whole thing, this moving on, feels wrong if you're not a part of it." And then, he closed the last inch of space between us. His lips met mine, and it wasn't a tentative questioning kiss. It was a kiss of certainty, of desperation, of years of unspoken words finally finding their release. It was soft and searching at first, then deepened as I responded, my own hands coming up to cup his face, my fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, and nothing I could have ever imagined. It tasted of salt from the single tear that escaped my eye, of the faint coffee on his breath, of a future I had never, ever allowed myself to believe was possible. It was a kiss that rewrote our entire history. Every shared look, every lingering touch, every late-night conversation was suddenly cast in a new light. It wasn't just friendship. It had never been just friendship. It was this. It had always been this. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, foreheads resting against each other. The silence that returned was different now. It wasn't heavy with unspoken feelings. It was light, filled with the quiet hum of a truth finally acknowledged. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his blue eyes shimmering in the dark. A slow, shaky smile spread across his face. A real smile, not for a diploma or for his family, but for me. "So," he breathed, his thumb still tracing the line of my jaw, "I guess my grandma can stop asking if you have a girlfriend." A laugh escaped me, a real unburdened laugh that felt like it came from a place in my chest that had been locked up for years. I leaned in and kissed him again. A short, sweet kiss, this time, a confirmation, a beginning. The lights of our town still glittered below us, the same map of our past, but something had fundamentally changed. The future, which had seemed like a terrifying, lonely highway stretching into the distance, now felt different. The road was still there, and the three-state distance was still real. But for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were heading in the same direction. After all, he was leaving. Yes, but he wasn't leaving me behind. He was taking me with him.